Well, good afternoon, LinkedIn. We're so glad you're here today for this conversation with this powerful panel of change makers from the nonprofit Hive community. We're going to be talking about a topic that's pretty hot in the sector: innovation despite limited resources, how nonprofits move forward anyway. And I'm really excited to be facilitating this session today because, of course, the topic is very near and dear to my heart. And today we're going to be talking with leaders who have launched mission-driven initiatives in different ways and exploring what it really looks like to start, adapt, and sustain something new in the sector. And we're going to be transparent and real about successes and obstacles and what makes it hard when it comes to innovation. So I'll introduce myself just to get things started. I'm Leah Kroll. I'm a nonprofit Hive advisory board member and very much a super fan of the nonprofit Hive. I really enjoy meeting folks in my Hive chats. I am a nonprofit consultant and I work with executive directors and boards on what I'll call the how of nonprofit innovation and impact. I am also the author of the book Innovation for Social Change: How Wildly Successful Nonprofits Inspire and Deliver Results. And so thank you so much for joining us, whether you're joining us live or catching the replay. Thank you for being here. And if you are joining us live, we'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what part of the nonprofit or social impact ecosystem you're connected to. There's no pressure to be all polished in the chat. Reflections and reactions are very much welcome throughout this conversation today. So before we do dive in, I'd just like to take a moment to thank our session sponsor, Charity Shift by Sarah Hoshuli. Charity Shift provides fundraising strategy and coaching for small fundraising teams. Their unique approach offers tangible ways to find new donors and to raise more money from the supporters you already have. So thank you, Charity Shift. So now I'm going to invite each speaker to briefly share their name, where they're based, could be your location, role, or organization, and briefly what drew you to this conversation. So I'm going to start with Kimberly.
Good morning, Leah. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon for some. My name is Kimberly Lewis, and I am the president and CEO of Goodwill Industries of East Texas, headquartered in Tyler, Texas.
Excellent. And Stephen.
Thanks, Leah. Hey, everyone. Great to be here. Stephen Baldwin, Director of Digital Product at Imagine Canada, based in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada, just outside of Toronto, working mainly on our Grant Connect product, if you're familiar with that. And I'm also on the advisory council for the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience. Super excited to be here. Love Nonprofit Hive.
Fantastic. And Joshua.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joshua, and it's a good evening already here. Glad to be here. I am the founder and CEO of Wekume. I am also the Chief Innovation Officer at Wekume. And what we do at Wekume is we connect and support young people, especially university students, to sexual reproductive health services. So I'm excited and I'm glad to connect with each one of you and share my thoughts about this wonderful topic.
Excellent. Well, thanks you all for being such a great panel today and being here and sharing your time so generously. So I'd like to start first with the question of what do we even mean when we talk about nonprofit innovation? And Kimberly, I'm going to start with you. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. And what I mean by that question, I think we all know that innovation gets talked about a lot. It can kind of be a hot buzzword in our sector. But often it seems to get reduced to new tech or big ideas. So from your vantage point, what does innovation really look like in a resource-limited nonprofit? And why do you think so many nonprofits don't even recognize themselves as innovators, maybe when they are?
That's a great question. When you apply for so many grants, they often use the term, it needs to be innovative. And really what that means for a nonprofit that is really resource limited is serving to the grant, not to the need. And unfortunately, what happens is we start chasing money. And, we're doing things already that are truly innovative because we are partnering, we're collaborating, we're doing more with less anyway. But sometimes funders don't necessarily see the day-to-day work as anything quote unquote sexy or innovative. And so that we have to, call it something else, do something else, jump through hoops, somersaults and all of that, when it's really just the day-to-day work that we're doing in our community with our partners and our collaborators, and we're finding ways to be more efficient and more effective. That's innovation.
I like that. That makes sense to me. Yeah, I agree. I think innovation can be big or small. And I think that, like you're saying, storytelling can be so important to make sure that we're not underselling ourselves when we are achieving amazing breakthroughs in the midst of our everyday work. So, yeah, I really appreciate that. Stephen, how about you? How do you think about this question?
Yeah, the underselling honestly really frustrates me, and we have so many successes in innovation and social innovation, and it's even worse in Canada in terms of underselling. I think like when it comes to big ideas, that's really the domain of this sector more than any other sector. We're trying to solve hunger, poverty, environmental destruction. We're trying to cure diseases like that. That's real innovation. Not NFTs and some of the AI slop coming out, and even tech innovation. Whether it's artificial intelligence or quantum, it starts in nonprofits and and funded by philanthropy, by governments, by these institutions. So I think that there's so much more that we can talk about, and I think the other piece, and I was thinking about coming into this panel, kind of what innovation looks like, and there's that saying of like move fast and break things, and we're having to move fast without breaking things, because when we break things in the nonprofit sector, the stakes are so high and there's real world consequences. But when our solutions are adopted and scaled, they can change communities, and sometimes they can really change the world in some fundamental way. So and just to speak to that, I guess like one I guess small way that isn't noticed that innovation comes up is for example, like an organization like Big Brothers Big Sisters, they have to collect extremely personal data on vulnerable young people and anonymize it and save it, and then use that data to advance their mission. And oh yeah, there's no senior IT person or tech team there. So there are these little ways that nonprofits innovate kind of every day that don't really get announced or even show up in your annual reports.
That. Yeah, I think what you said added color to Kimberly's comments, and you're kind of building off each other here. Joshua, I would love to hear how you think about this question.
Yeah, actually, I have been kind of contemplating about my response, and my mind just went through. I recently got into a boot camp, and I was the only non-profit or social enterprise, so everybody was kind of doing for profit, and everybody I would talk to, they would kind of feel like, I mean, you're in the wrong place. You're not supposed to be here, and it kind of made me feel a little bit out of the place, like I wasn't there. So it just kind of reminded me of how people look at nonprofits, and there is a tendency here that as a nonprofit or an NGO or social enterprise, you are doing things for free. So therefore, you probably are not using any sort of intervention. You're kind of there, but you're not really there. Like you're doing things at a very, like you're not really serious. You cannot be competitive. So and but but as I've grown to be working with Wekume, I've realized that we've got to be agile. We've got to have a business model. We've got to explain our solution to the users to understand how is it, like, how does it work? How does it help them? We've got to actually move our solution to make sure that it's problem, it's a solution problem based kind of approach. It is helping to solve a problem that not even a for-profit business can actually solve. And a few months ago, when we visited with the Ministry of Health, we were trying to work with them. The Ministry of Health was like, well, you guys, you're in that space. We can't give you money, but we realize you're in a very niche kind of space. Like nobody's doing anything about your space. We don't know what to do. So we are kind of going to be relying on you guys to do the job on our behalf. So the government is kind of entrusting us to do something that they're not sure how to go about it, but we're doing it. So in that space, that calls us to be innovative, because when you deal with a demographic like the one that we're dealing with, they have a lot of priorities that are always changing, from minute to minute. today we're talking about AI, next time we might be talking about something else. So if you don't prepare yourself to be innovative in a way that you do not have to be spending, or like you're not so much restricted by how resources coming in and go, you might find yourself having difficulties. But at Wekumi, we are trying to, you know, always think about how do we scale with
Yes, yes.
the little that we have so that we create more impact. And
Yes, I think it's hard, right? This is hard work that our sector is doing, and I like the points that you all have raised that we should really give the nonprofit sector a lot of credit, deserves a lot of credit, because we're filling those gaps where problems, really hard problems that markets can't make money off of. How are we, as you said, right? How are we going to address, health issues or education issues, homeless issues, and so on? So there's a lot of innovation automatically happening as we're trying to solve those really hard problems that either markets or governments can't solve just by the nature of how they're structured. So also, another interesting point that I heard as you all were talking, there's kind of this range of innovation, right? So you can have really big innovation on one end of the scale. I'm thinking of like the civil rights movement or the creation of the 911 emergency system, or those really big things the X Prize Foundation works on. But then there's like little small process improvements that happen in the workplace that are innovations as well, that Kimberly was talking about, that maybe aren't so sexy and we aren't even sure how to sell them to our funders. But that matters very much, right? So I think you all have, I love this conversation. This has been great. Let's go ahead and move on to another question. And Stephen, I'm going to start with you. So, many nonprofits don't innovate despite limited resources. They innovate because of them. And I think of that movie, The Martian, right? Like where Matt Damon is stuck on Mars, his crew left him behind. He's got very little, and he has to figure out how to survive with so little. And I think nonprofits are often like that, right? We're figuring things out, not despite limited resources, but because of them. So Stephen, can you share a moment where there's a constraint? Maybe it's lack of funding or staff or tech or permission that actually might lead to a more creative or effective solution. Have you seen that?
Yeah, for sure. And I don't want a funder to see this and think, oh, great, when I restricted the funding, it really helped. And Imagine Canada has always been, a huge advocate for more flexible funding, unrestricted funding. But I've definitely seen, when you have constraints, you really have to focus on what's essential. So again, like my lens is maybe unique, but in the lens of building digital products at a nonprofit, the product I manage, Grant Connect, we have to compete with both Canadian and international for-profit products with large tech and sales teams. So that's kind of forced us to lean into like what's our kind of the unique value we add, because there's constant existential threats. So we have to look at the trust we've accumulated as Imagine Canada, our unique understanding and empathy for the sector, and really our community and network. And like these things like trust, empathy, and community, they seem like these sort of abstract things, but they're not. Like they've allowed us to secure unique data sets, secure major partnerships and funding, and help us keep subscribers with us for 5, 10, 20 years. So kind of like as those constraints have forced us to kind of lean into these intangible things and really try to understand how they bring value.
Excellent. That's a great example. It's very helpful. Joshua, how about you? What have you seen where constraints actually led to a more creative solution? I bet you've got some stories.
Yeah, definitely, I do. A few years ago, while we were starting out, we did not have any. We were basically on zero, so but we knew we had something. I had experience from my experience from reproductive health, but I didn't know how to translate that into something that can help and support the community. So I kind of got into, I was using WhatsApp. So I'm like, okay, I can't build an MV because I'm not a developer. I tried building a website, but that didn't go well with me because, it was a little bit, it wasn't that good. So, but I was like, how about we try something else? I got WhatsApp. So we started asking people with WhatsApp, say, hey, would you use a platform or a mobile app that connects you to sexual reproductive health services. And most of young people, they are not so much conversant about sexual reproductive health. When you ask them, it might mean you're asking them whether they're having sex, which is not even what you're actually trying to mean. Because we have cultural context when you're trying to say things in English versus in my language. If I say something in English and then I try to translate it in Luganda, sexual reproductive health might sound vulgar, and we are very culturally, very, very, like we're kind of strict on that. So that made it harder. So we had to kind of use WhatsApp and just kind of say things to the young people. They might not really care, but then you're trying to interact with people like the older generations. That's where the issues come from. So we used WhatsApp a little bit, and then we realized now we needed to kind of move on to how do we test another feature. Then we kind of started using my place as a distribution point for condoms, and then a few years ago, we realized now we have an MVP, but now we do not have the resources to connect, like to build a facility. Like we don't have money to build a facility. Well, as our services were tied to stigma, fighting stigma. We have a very big issue with, as far as sexual reproductive health is concerned. Stigma is a very big issue, and young people cannot go to facilities because they don't want to be seen. Getting a condom might be misunderstood as somebody who's overly having sex, whereas it is, somebody's trying to protect themselves, but that's not how community sees it. So, and the fact that when somebody goes to university, it means that somebody is mature enough to make independent decisions, but that is not even the case. These are young people. Imagine an 18-year-old who has just been in secondary school, or I don't know, I think you guys call it college or something, or high school. Then they have to go to university. They are living on their own. They're navigating relationships for the first time, or the independence. They can go out all night, come back. So many things happen at that time. So we're like, okay, how do we make sure that we are able to support the young people or our users, the students, get timely access? Because the issue was, how do you prevent crisis from becoming, from becoming like a war, like from becoming negatively impactful for the rest of their lives. Somebody getting HIV, somebody getting pregnant, that is going to kind of halt their studies. So what we did was we immediately said, okay, we can get the campuses and we can carry out on-site testings. But then what happens if we get an HIV student? And that happened. And I was the one that was testing that student, and she had HIV. And she didn't actually know she had HIV. And we were all devastated. We didn't know what to do. We weren't prepared for that kind of scenario. So she's with all of us there, with her friends. She has HIV, and now we're stuck. But immediately, like, okay, you know what? Something has to be done. So we reached out to another health facility. Like, guys, would you be willing to work with us if we brought in students that have HIV? Would you be willing to take them up? They're like, yeah, we'll be happy to.
Yeah, that's a great story.
So the young people, they are afraid to go to the government health facilities because of the stigma and the communities and everything. Whereas this other facility, it is meant for young people, and the students, they are their target audience. So instead of saying, okay, let us think about setting up a health facility, all those kind of things, what we could usually do, just get the person, take them to the health facility, this one facility that had accepted, and then we'll move on from there.
That's so great. And I want to get to Kimberly, but I love everything you're talking about are kind of like those steps of innovation and problem solving with limited resources, and all these threads that you pulled in, the importance of local context. You pulled in your community when you weren't sure. You were asking them questions, which I also think is such a benefit of the nonprofit Hive community too, right? When we can have each other to ask when we aren't sure about things. So thank you so much. That was really helpful. And I know there's more to the story, but keeping an eye on time here, I wanted to make sure we got to Kimberly. Kimberly, what have you experienced? Can you share a moment where constraint actually led to a more creative or effective solution?
Absolutely. Very much like Joshua's example of really resolving a problem and an issue. Many years ago, before I started leading Goodwill Industries territories, I was leading an adult literacy program. And the problem we had was, retention, keeping students in the class because the government would not fund you until your students had been in directed service for 12 hours. So they had to be, in class, documented for at least 12 hours. And it was like a revolving door. And so you might serve, 500 or 600 people and they go for 11 hours and then they drop out. And as soon as they drop out, you have to withdraw them and you have to start all over again when they come back a couple of months later, or sometimes a year later. And so I recognize that what people value is what they pay for. No one in the entire state, I was in South Carolina then, no one in the entire state, no organization was charging a fee. And it was looked down upon. And so, I said, is there a reason why? Is there a statute against why not charging a fee? Because people value what they pay for. And I said, we can charge a very nominal, small fee to get buy-in. And so we began doing that, and our retention rate improved by 30%. The state actually gave me an award for innovation. I thought it was so crazy. And so today, for some of our classes, when I see that there's a retention issue, we charge a $20 fee, a $30 fee, whatever that is, to get their buy-in, because they will stay in the program as long as they think that they're getting their money's worth. And, it just goes back to human nature. And so we were able to serve them and help them more effectively and efficiently because we could get them to sit still long enough to receive the services.
Great. So you're sort of testing the idea of if they put a stake in it, if they put their own skin in the game, will that matter? And it turns out that it did. I just want to take a moment here to remind our audience that if you do have a question or comment about innovation, do feel free to drop it in the chat. And, if something lands, let us know. And we may actually pose your question to the panel. I know we're short on time. We're mindful of the time. But yeah, feel free to share those questions. And if we don't answer it now here in the panel, that we'll all be going over to LinkedIn to look at everyone's comments and probably be responding to them later. So thank you so much for interacting here. So I want to shift to another challenge. One of the biggest barriers to innovation may not be money. It may be isolation. And some of you have already mentioned the importance of community. So I'm going to start with Joshua. But where do you see siloed thinking holding nonprofits back? And what have you seen work? You already kind of gave us a story about this. What have you seen work when organizations choose collaboration, partnership, or shared infrastructure instead? So Joshua, what's been your experience with that?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think I kind of already touched on it. Really, it is realizing that you can, you really can't win alone. There is so many people that are doing so much great work out there. And one of the challenges will be you wanting to, to reinvent the wheel, which kind of might take more resources and everything. But I feel, just like the story I've shared, identifying people that will be willing to work with you. And that also takes effort. But some people might be more interested in working with you if once they realize that you're not trying to burden them. Like we have a feature in our app that we are working on that we are going to roll out soon that will require to reward students for this health-seeking behavior. Because we know students, they don't really want to go, they're scared. So you reward them, you go for an HIV test, you get points. Now, once points hit a certain number, you can redeem them for something tangible, a t-shirt, a lunch coupon, a breakfast coupon or something. So now that is a little bit complicated because now these guys have to go into the system and they have to reward students manually, because we don't want to be passive, automatic. So the health practitioner have to go into the system, add points, manually so that they are seen. But at the start, they're not required to do anything. Just accept us, go into their system, and that is easy. So I think to me is trying to reinvent the wheel. That is kind of like the biggest thing that might be holding us behind as nonprofits.
Yeah, there's just such a wealth of resources and knowledge out there, like gamifying. That's a clever solution, and there's just so much we can learn from these conversations with each other, which we're doing a lot in the Hive, and I value so much. Kimberly, what's your experience with this question?
I think so many times what causes that siloed thinking is desperation and fear of collaboration, and I've seen it on both ends. Either organizations are like, we don't want anybody else, to get the funding or to know exactly what we're doing, or they'll take our idea. Or in the case of Goodwill, we're a large organization. And so sometimes they'll push back because they think, well, you're so large, you're going to swallow us up. And it's really not about that. It's about, let's come to the table. Let's, talk about the ideas and the issues. There's a piece that you can do and a piece that we can do. Where you may lack the staff, I may have the staff. Where you lack the bandwidth, I may have the bandwidth. Where you lack the IT, I have the IT. And so we can come together. So if we break down those barriers and those walls of fear, then the isolation will also melt away.
That's some great wisdom. How about you, Stephen? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I definitely have seen that fear as well, and being kind of protective. Specifically for me, it's in the data context. So in one of my projects, we're using Grant Connect's giving data and some other sources to map the funding landscape in Canada and identify trends and maybe make predictions about where things are heading. But there's thousands of philanthropy data sources that would give us more context and insights, but they're kind of they're siloed, and they're protected within governments and other nonprofits in academia. So there are these major data silos that if we could unlock them, it would be better for the entire sector. But I would say that when you actually meet with these institutions, especially when you're meeting with other nonprofits, the conversations are very collaborative and open. So sometimes there is kind of a relationship and a trust element, and seeing that we're not in competition, that we're actually working together. And I think like as systems thinking is kind of becoming the norm. And I think when I heard about systems thinking early on, and when I was working in a nonprofit, it just seemed like this kind of abstract thing. But I'm seeing more and more kind of cross-sector partnerships and this acknowledgement that we need to work together to really move things forward. And I think like within our sector, but also these public-private partnerships, multi-sector partnerships, and it's often, almost always, from what I've seen, it's nonprofits that are leading those kind of cross-sector partnerships. But before, I wanted to add also, I know in these talks, there's often kind of resources shared, and I think like everyone in our sector should read even a summary of the book Thinking in Systems. And there's another book more recently called Everyday Habits for Transforming Systems. It's really, at least personally, it's really just changed my perspective on some of the issues that we're trying to solve.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of systems thinking, and yeah, it can be abstract or scare people away, but it's so important. I think of like the human body, right? Where it's one body, right, but different parts, and it's all essential. And I think so the body as a system, it's the same, right? When we're trying to problem solve, how can we all come together from our different sides of the street to solve these really complex problems out there in the world? And yeah, you're right that nonprofits may be taking the lead. Maybe it's that necessity is the mother of invention, right? That we're trying so hard to solve these really hard problems. So that could be why. Moving on to another question here. This is a touchy one, but let's talk about power dynamics. So I'm going to start with Kimberly. I think we all know innovation does not happen in a vacuum, right? It can be shaped by who holds power and who sets the rules. So how do funder expectations or reporting structures or approved ways of working limit innovation? And where have you seen nonprofits successfully push back, adapt, or reframe those constraints? What's been your experience there?
Well, certainly, it goes back to the earlier question of, really performing for the grants and performing for the funder. And I think really how nonprofits can reframe the discussion is early on, first by having a discussion. And, we don't chase We don't chase money. We don't chase grants. We don't, all of a sudden come up with something that we're not doing just so that we can receive some funders' money. We want to be a true partner, and true partnership is really having some buy-in on both ends. So it has to be beneficial for the funder, beneficial for the nonprofit, and most of all, beneficial to the recipient, the individual or communities that we serve. If any of those things is missing, it's simply not going to work. You can't be performative, and doing the pick me, pick me, pick me. That doesn't work because it's not sustainable. And when you're starting to, do your reports and all of those things, it's constantly you're trying to prove yourself, prove yourself, prove yourself. The proof is in the pudding already. It's the so what question. You got the funding. Are you making an impact? How are you making that impact? And so you want to do some storytelling on the front end and say, here's what we're already doing. Here's how we're making impact, and here's how we're going to make further impact with your partnership and your collaboration. If it works for all of us, great. If it doesn't, thank you very much for the opportunity.
I like that. It reminds me of mission drift. There's that risk, right? And it may not always be the right thing to accept money, related to mission drift. So those are really good points. Stephen, what's your experience on this question?
Yeah, I love Kimberly's answer, because you see a lot of nonprofits that are kind of fighting for this one grant, and they celebrate when they get it, but that 1 year or 2 years, it passes very quickly, and then all of a sudden you got to renew again. And I also think that kind of performative relationship is unsustainable. And I think what Kimberly also captured is like the essence of trust-based philanthropy, at least how I understand it. So I think for Imagine Canada, I'll speak for myself. I don't want to speak for all of Imagine Canada, I guess, but I think we find that our funder relationships work best when there isn't that they aren't fundamental to our survival. So one thing that we're trying to emphasize more is our social enterprises, and trying to earn our own revenue through these social enterprises like Grant Connect. So we have a little bit more control and autonomy over what we do with our funding. And then for the kind of additional projects that will add a lot of value and have high impact, then we can kind of work with funders, and we don't have to worry that, if we lose this funder relationship, or if they change their priorities, all of a sudden, it tilts our organization on its head. So I think, we're definitely trying to lean in more to, like, we still want to have diversified revenue, but leaning more into our social enterprises and earned income streams.
Fantastic. That's very helpful. Let's see. I'd love to hear from Joshua also on what you're experiencing with this question.
Yeah, this is tricky. As I had Kim and and my other panelists speak, I was like, it is tricky for us here, because first of all, most of the funding comes from outside the country, and that means you pretty much have to align with whatever they're saying, which it makes it hard for us to push back, because, for example, if a funder says, I'm giving X amount of money and I want you to reach this target number of people, if you want to get extra funding, you have to come back. And actually, that was the thing with USAID, like, they dictate whatever you want to, with whatever they want, and you have to do it. This includes numbers, what. So I think, to me, it is really with for example, with Wekume, is trying to come up with a sustainability model, so that if a funder says, I can't fund you, then we're not stuck. Or if a funder says, I can only do up to until this time, now we know what is going to happen. So actually, for every resource that we're trying to mobilize, one is we're trying to say we have some buffer set aside. Another one is we're trying to work on our sustainability model, so that if a funder is like, you know what, guys, this and this and this, like, okay, we want the money, of course, and it's hard if you don't have the money, but you want your mission to keep going. So you kind of say you have to choose, like, the easier hard, because you don't want to get stuck at the end of the day. So it's, to me, it is striking a balance of, what is the easier hard and the hardest hard to take.
Interesting. I wonder if you're touching on risk a little bit there. I think in my mind, risk is just a part and parcel of innovation. Like when you think, what is innovation, right? There's always trial and error. Well, there's that error part. And we think about power dynamics and how funders might feel about that. As you all have heard each other speak, does that thought strike any of you and what you've heard from each other? How does our sector think about risk or risk aversion? Is there such a thing as maybe intelligent risk taking so that we can find breakthroughs? What does that strike any of you? Do you have comments on that?
Yeah, definitely. Really, like, risk, somebody just mentioned about taking risks here. Sometimes, you are innovator, you've got to take risks anyways. We recently applied for an investment, and honestly, I didn't never thought that we'd get it, but I was, guys, let's do it. And we didn't get it, obviously, but we asked them for feedback, and they gave us feedback. I was actually very surprised that we got feedback, positive feedback, and now we are working on make sure that we get to the point where we at least meet, those, what they expect from us. And also, based off the previous response, and the question that was here is, for us who are in the global south, we have minimum, like, pushback. You can only push to a certain point because, first of all, you have a limited resource pool. It is, you have to get to a point for you to get domestic funders. You have to get to a point where they can't ignore working with you, or else no one, you don't get any domestic support. So now that makes it hard for you to kind of, take any calculated risks, or anyhow, like, you've got to take a risk. Like, okay, you kind of, like, it's a 50 or 50-70 chance that it will work out versus it won't work out. So that will be my thought on that.
Yeah, power dynamics are a real thing when it comes to risk. And I just see the thoughts in Kimberly. I know she's got a comment there. Kimberly?
I both of Joshua and Stephen mentioned it about social enterprise. I think that is the key. It is risky, because what you're doing is you're creating a business structure, a business model that will support your not-for-profit efforts. Now, we know a nonprofit is still a business, point blank period. You have to treat it like a business. You're going to have expenses, you're going to have revenue. So you need to have a return on that investment. That investment may be your money, it's going to be your time, your staff, all the resources and the things in systems theory thinking that you need to produce the product or the service that you're going to provide to your public. But you also really need not to be dependent on any one section or sector to fund you. And so social enterprise is that key. Now, here's the rub, if you will. The rub is that society as a whole really does not want a nonprofit to take risks, but you have to take risks or you won't be in business very long. There are mitigated risks. There are risks that you're certainly going to study and research and, try your best, and you're going to get some partnerships and make sure that you have all your ducks in a row, and you're going to start small and scale upward. But if you don't have some other income coming in from multiple sources, whether it is self-generated, in addition to funders and outside dollars, you simply will not be sustained for very long.
There's a lot of wisdom in that, and the importance of experiments. Like often, a nonprofit itself is a hypothesis. We're saying we believe if we put these resources into this problem and run these programs, we think that there will be this good outcome over here. So our organization itself is it's a guess and a risk because there are no guarantees. These are really hard problems that we're working on. So, and I think a lot of times it can be so wise that experimentation and taking these risks to figure out what works will end up saving us money in the long run. I see Stephen nodding, right? He's probably doing those sorts of experiments all the time. I want to point in our few minutes left, I've been taking a look at the chat is just full of comments and people are really engaging with your conversation here. Something that seems to be really lighting up the chat is this concept of unhealthy fear of collaboration. And where does that come from? And why is that? So I don't know if any of you want to take a stab at that in our few minutes left here, just dive deeper into that question, because collaboration seems so essential, right? When we have limited resources and to find breakthroughs. What holds our sector back there? What do you think? Anyone?
Yeah, I could chime in there. I guess just to emphasize from the previous question that taking risks is a prerequisite to innovation, and you can't do it unless you have control over your revenue, you have autonomy. For this, I would say, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think a lot of the fears and the siloing that we see, it's resolved through trust and building relationships. And you have these kind of internal feelings and reactions, but when you actually meet and collaborate and share some of your understanding and build a relationship with someone, it really breaks down those walls. And I think sometimes we try to rush that, but it does take time to build relationships and build trust.
I think that trust building is so key. And it's not just between nonprofits, it's also your for-profits. I have a lot of collaborative partners who are for-profit, but there has to be transparency. There has to be true buy-in and, what's something that is going to serve all parties involved.
I mean, in my case, when we're starting out, people tell us, don't give out your idea out, somebody's going to steal it, because they've, somebody says, oh, they stole this idea from such and such. But really, man, no one knows how you're going to execute whatever you're doing. Honestly, at this point, I feel so comfortable giving somebody anything about Wekume, because not everything that we need to do is listed in the documents. Everything is not there. It is about 20%. So you don't have the blueprint of the entire picture, how we even get there. So I think it is understanding that, man, whatever it is, just keep calm. Things will work out. No one will execute the way you want to execute whatever you are doing.
Yes, I've heard it said too. I've heard it said in our sector, it might have been in a book about forces for good, I think, where it's not really about carving up a piece of the pie. When we collaborate, that really expands the pie, right? That we can do so much more when we collaborate and aren't, siloing our information. And my book is full of stories of nonprofits collaborating and the greater impact that they can have. I think of Strive Together in Cincinnati that just brought a huge coalition of hundreds of nonprofits and for-profit businesses and people from the school system to all work together on the problem of better outcomes for at-risk young people there in the Cincinnati area. And they've had great outcomes. And now they've replicated this in I think 70 cities across the United States. Well, I know we're all passionate about this topic. It's been a fun topic today. And thank you all so much. It's been a great panel. And I really appreciate all the comments that have been lighting up the chat. And I'm pretty sure even if we didn't get to your comment in the chat, the panelists will all take a look at LinkedIn later and be adding our comments and engaging with these. So a huge thank you today to Kimberly Lewis, Stephen Baldwin, and Joshua Emmanuel Walasimbi for your honesty, insight, and lived experience. And thank you so much to the audience for showing up and engaging. And if you aren't already, be sure to follow the Nonprofit Hive on LinkedIn or visit thenonprofithive.com for upcoming sessions and community offerings. And a huge thank you to Charity Shift by Sarah Hoshuli for supporting this conversation. So thank you all so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks, everyone.